And I'd like to welcome to the panel Claire Harney, who is very familiar, of course, to the HealthTech Ireland Association, formerly of this parish, and now CEO of Health Digital herself, her own company, and she's done extensive work across the sector, including the RCSI. Beside her is Mark Coffey of Johnson & Johnson, and as you know, they're one of the world's premier suppliers of a whole range of healthcare products, services, and so on, from medical devices, biogenics, right across the board, and obviously is right front and centre into global procurement. And last but not least, the man in the hot seat here on the panel, John Swords, Head of Procurement with the HSE, so a bit like the CIO, probably in the firing line here, but I think is really important and very much appreciated you're coming along today to tell us what are the changes in terms of procurement. And, you know, it does strike me, as someone who's not directly involved in this sector, that the way technology is developing, capacity is infinite. Demand, we know, is infinite. You can keep operating at people, you know, beyond 100, but resources are finite, and that is obviously the difficulty. You know, last week I was at a fundraiser for Cancer Trials Ireland, and they would have you believe that, you know, developing new clinical products there to save people's lives is the most important thing. If you listen to Gary Boyle, other things are the most important thing, and therefore it's a very difficult balancing act that the likes of John has to do. And last but not least, someone who is an absolute global expert on health economics, on our screen from Germany, from the WIFOR Institute, Professor Dennis Ostwald, who is Head of Health Economics and CEO of that institute. And maybe actually I'll start with you, Dennis. What do you understand to be value-based procurement? Is it the cheapest? Is it what?
Thank you very much for the invitation and greetings to Dublin, Ireland. It's a pleasure to be here at the conference. Sorry that I couldn't join the conference in Dublin. Yes, but I really would like to contribute to this interesting topic. So, yes, value-based pricing, and I listened very carefully to Lars, and I like his approach about total value of ownership. But what's value, right? And we need to think about measuring value. And actually, I'm a little bit scared right now. I was invited to the G20 meeting in Washington. I was invited to the G7 meeting in Berlin. Germany has the presidency of the G7, and ministers of finance, ministers of health, other institutions. And I was kind of shocked that nobody is thinking about health anymore. There are other topics on the top agenda, like the war in Europe, like other crises. And I felt a little bit, hey, we are still in a pandemic crisis. You have seen that countries who invest in health don't suffer as much as others who are not investing enough in health. And if you think about investment in health, and the ministers of finance start again thinking health is a cost factor, then I'm really afraid. And I fight for a new perspective. We need, of course, the perspectives that health is investment and that it pays off. Lucky we, WHO and others are aligned with this aspect, and they are ours for metrics. And that's a good thing that we wrote a policy paper for G20 in the presidency of Italy together with Harvard University, with Alan Donnelly from the G20 as a partnership. About the topic, if we can't measure it, we can't fix it. And we need to start measuring the value to society. And it's not only about the value-based pricing and value-based procurement, it's about repositioning the sector, the health economy sector, as the value driver for societies. And we need to address not only procurement, not only the payer side, but we need to build supporters next to the health politicians. We need to establish health economy as an important driver of growth, of employment, of innovation, of exports, and of better health, and last but not least, of greater wealth. Because without health, we are not wealthy. And this is why we suggested in our policy paper, and it's now also in the presidency in Indonesia, we suggested to measure, first of all, the impact of all health investments, I don't like the expression health expenditures, to the GDP. Secondly, we need to analyze the value chain of healthcare. We need to break silos. We should think about budget. We should think about target setting. We should think about what we want to achieve in 2030. How much do we want to decrease disease areas, the burden of disease areas in cardiovascular disease or in other disease areas? And we should consider the digital transformation within this patient journey and this value chain of healthcare.
Okay.
Third, and then two more sentences. Third, we should take also the value of the investment and spillover effects to the economy into account. And last but not least, the social impact of all these investments to the value of the value of the society.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. Stay with us. Just by the way, there is a fresh question on the poll option on Slido. Do you anticipate any continuity of supply issues for products for your organisation supplies due to meeting the MDR/IVDR requirements, which we will be debating in detail, and you think it mightn't affect you, but it will? Yes, maybe, or no. I want to go straight to you, John. What's new in terms of procurement, in terms of both the opportunity, in terms of the criteria of what you're looking at, and where are you at?
Well, I hope this isn't a sign the times of a weapon.
That's all right.
But first of all, thank you for inviting us to, and I can talk collectively on that from HSE, to talk with you today. I think it's important. What's new and where are we going? We've developed now a corporate plan which is in the very final stages in relation to procurement. And in that we cover areas such as sláinte care, a climate action, which if you were in the Eurovision, it's like the Ukraine, it's going to win every vote by way of importance. And it really is importance. We are talking about compliance as well, and compliance has a lot in it. It's not all it goes to the value-based proposition. It's about making sure that we have the MDR. I know Nicola is going to talk later in relation to regulations. We're working with the HPRA and we should be working collectively. We did so with Brexit. We were very successful in that, so the cooperation is there. The whole area of value, and what do we mean by value, and how do we bring that value to bear collectively. What's in our award criteria? You will see climate change coming into our award criteria. You'll see other factors, but they don't have to be standard factors. They can be changed by the way of bringing in innovation. We've learned that innovation is a very, very good way forward, but there has to be a little bit of caution put in that by way of, it can't be just innovation walking in the door and expecting that we can land innovation. It must fit with our goals and what we're trying to achieve and grow it into the system. I heard Miriam talking about, James, the link between the hospitals. If innovation is brought into the system correctly, it can actually do that. It's seamless because the legislation allows for that. So it's about educating people and how we make that happen. But innovation is very good. What's really, really important is collaboration among everybody that works towards patient care. Fran mentioned that at the very last point. One of the last points he mentioned was patient care. Everything falls from patient care. And everything that we do in procurement works towards that goal. And we have a lot of areas that we need to work with. We need to work with our services. We need to work with our procurement people. We need to train them, give them the correct training, how to evaluate what's coming at us from the markets. But the markets need to shape it as well. And they need to shape towards what is the need within health for patient care. And yes, I mention that awful word called money. You know, value-based isn't about money, but money matters in some ways. And if you look at what's happening to us right across the globe, I mentioned this earlier on to a number of people, the Ukraine war, which is horrible, and we are doing a lot of work with Ukraine, a lot of people who work in our services, who have family working in hospitals in Ukraine, giving us first-hand information of what's needed. We've worked with, collaborating with the companies, fantastic work being done by a lot of our team and Ukraine Aid, and all that goes with that, getting aid out to other countries. We do all that. But the key, if you like, driver and the learning from the last couple of years, and I'm going to mention this, around pandemic, we've learned an awful lot about ourselves. We've learned an awful lot about our own well-being. We talk about working from home, we talk about working in the office and the difficulties in throwing those around. Getting people back to work now is a real issue. And for others, you open the door and they were gone, immediately back into work. It had different impact on people's well-being. But we learned a lot about how people work and how people think. And similarly, what we learned was cooperation across all of government. I've never seen it before, even when you were there yourself, Ivan, from the point of view, government agencies coming all together with the public sector and working in a way that was never seen before. And it was tremendous.
Okay, that's what is happening in terms of procurement, Claire. You're familiar with this whole area. What is value, and what do you think the HSE or the government needs to reorientate in terms of assessing value? Because, if you say sustainability is the most important thing, then you look for the contracts that you don't have reusable plastics. You just have thermometers that don't have to be, disposed of. So reusable instead of disposable becomes the most important thing. But if you're looking for things that will maybe get better patient throughput, that could be value for the patient to get them home earlier. What is value?
And that's the burning question. And I think from various different perspectives, value is going to be a different thing. That's why all stakeholders' agreement on what constitutes value and what the elements of that are. There's no one definition. There are multiple elements to value that must take into account all of the stakeholders. I think that starting point of agreement on what constitutes value and how we're going to measure it from all of the different elements. And just take an example of one of the large chronic diseases, respiratory care, something in that area. You may have a solution that will work in an acute hospital. You'll look at the cost of that solution, as you should. You'll also look at the cost of that aspect within an acute hospital of care delivery. But looking at perhaps the wider care pathway of that patient's chronic disease, both within the acute hospital, in the community, in primary care and at home, you start to develop a wider understanding of the true cost of care for that type of illness. Then you can start to look at what are the impacts and what impacts should we be measuring in terms of outcome and other factors such as sustainability, not just within the acute hospital, but the wider reaching impacts of a solution. And it's when it comes to innovation that you start to see wider impacts that may have been unforeseen.
But if you, going from concept to reality, if we go with this stay left, shift left, you'd nearly put all your money into stuff that can be done remotely, the diagnostics in the home. How do you draw that into the criteria? How do you get that concept and put it into a value proposition?
Yeah. That's where we have the beauty of the likes of Martin Curley's approach, the stay left, shift left, and the 10X, but also places like Health Innovation Hub Ireland, where we have the opportunity to trial these solutions, to trial innovation in a real healthcare setting. Look at what parameters matter, look at the outcomes that we're achieving at small scale, and then start to ramp up, in an appropriate manner. At the moment, that scalability we've got a bit of a gap there, and I think that's where procurement has a key role with scaling to national level, but only of the solutions that truly work. And it's that fail-fast approach. If something is not adding value at a certain level, then we don't scale it. But we need agreement on what are we measuring to see, is it adding value, and who's it adding value to?
So what you're saying is maybe a two-tier approach, whereby you'd have tenders to let people see if the technology works, and then to look at scaling it up.
Yeah,
as opposed to saying, we'll put all our bucks into this technology.
I would never say put all our eggs in one basket. But we already have the mechanism for piloting solutions here in Ireland and piloting innovations. It works really, really well. We have a lot of the innovation corridors in individual hospitals and HI, and a number of other ways of getting pilots into the system. And that way we have the opportunity for test beds, sandboxing, looking at partnerships to scale. But it's the other side of it within the system. If something is evaluated to an agreed methodology, it should be scaled if it is indeed adding value to agreed parameters.
Okay. Mark, you have a family of huge healthcare brands. What approach, internationally are the trends that you see emerging in terms of other governments beyond Ireland, in terms of value? Is it changing? And how does that apply to the health tech sector?
Yeah, I think, Ivan, every market is doing it slightly differently. I think there's huge variety. Where I'm seeing real progress is probably in those countries that have a very large private sector. Generally speaking, the private sector tends to move a little bit quicker, and there's good reasons for that. They make decisions a lot quicker. I think the public sector has been a little bit more constrained from a tender legislation perspective.
So you're talking about private hospitals leading the way?
Private hospitals, private groups have led the way. I think we're catching up very rapidly. I think EU legislation has changed significantly a number of years ago to allow procurement to engage much more proactively. Give you a couple of examples, maybe, Ivan. Yeah. One, you were talking earlier about how do we do this and how do we make this real? Because it all sounds very,
motherhood and apple pie. I'm listening to it every day, yeah.
But there's one critical success factor in my mind that we have to absolutely focus on in terms of defining value, and that's we need to sit together as stakeholders and define what that value is. So if John and his team are starting a procurement process, rather than put out an RFQ or a tender without engaging with industry and engaging with other stakeholders, we need to sit down together, and that's starting to happen, to really define what are the key metrics that we're going to judge in terms of evaluating that tender. And that needs to be price, absolutely. That's a very important part of it, but it also needs to be other things that really contribute to the overall patient outcome.
And would you point to a country in Europe that has done that best?
Yeah, I think the Nordics are probably further ahead. I think if you look at the Nordics, so Sweden, Denmark, Norway are much further ahead, I think, than we are. But we're rapidly catching up. Generally speaking, I think most countries are moving in this direction. Nordics, NHS in the UK is probably also significantly further ahead.
Okay, surprise, surprise again. On the slide, all the questions are for John, so this is going to turn into a fireside chat. I'll do rapid fire, same as with Fran. John, often at tender time, the historic tender is published again with the same questions and the same weighting scheme. Will the procurement system change to reflect and account the value that can be added by vendors and to allow this to be evaluated appropriately? Really what Mark was just saying.
Yeah. It does fit with the way we are moving, because we have, for example, the EHR for the Children's Hospital. There was significant engagement with service providers. And from that then, the specifications for our requirements were changed. So yes, with the DPS is going to be a way of going forward to dynamic purchasing systems, which is a better way of working from the point of view of not setting out a framework that will only last for 4 years. New companies come in, they can't get into it, so on. DPS is more fluid. But before that, it is about setting out our requirements. Now, in bog standard products, it's good. You can say that, but you can't say that anymore, because by 2023, under the European legislation, we have to allow for the climate change award criteria to come into all tenders. And as a result, we're going to have a look at that. Now, sustainability is a very, very fluid, it's nearly a blasé kind of thing. You really do need to get into the nuts and bolts of that and say how, for each element or each part of industry that we have working to us, of which there are significant numbers of companies, how can we evaluate their products and award people good marks for being good companies and taking climate change very, very seriously.
There's quite a few
there is
questions.
Change there.
Now, these are variations on the same theme. What do the HSE think of value-based procurement models that are currently being adopted in other countries? For example, the NHS supply chain in England. You aware of that, or what do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not aware. That's a very broad question.
Okay. The UK NHS, anything to learn?
Yeah, I think there's some good examples. Again, UK have been piloting a lot, and they're now starting to move to scale. So I think they're a little bit ahead of us in some of the categories that are looking at. An example of that would be perhaps in hip replacements, hip and knee replacements, or arthroplasty. What they're now starting to do, which we're doing to a small scale, is they're looking at, yes, the cost of the device, and looking at that, but they're also looking at what about all the services and solutions that companies can now provide to really impact on that patient journey. So the pre-operative tools and the post-operative tools, a lot of them are digital, and what they're doing is really impacting the overall patient outcome.
There's a lot of questions here. How can HSE procurement evolve to help startups get their innovation into the system? Now, we heard about the corridors and we heard about the Innovation Centre in Tala. Is that the best way or what?
Well, we are very interested in innovation, and there is a whole programme of work that we have, the HIHI, along with other mechanisms in which we're working with Martin and other colleagues around bringing in innovation. But I will say this in innovation, and I hear what you're saying in relation to how we bring it forward. If you start innovation correctly, it has a wonderful mechanism of being able to have growth. If you don't follow the rules, it actually runs up against all the barriers that we've been talking about up to now, and we will talk about after, because you're then not in the system. So if innovation and the legislation is there, we can help that. So there's plenty of opportunities there.
Claire, one of the things that Lars referred to was incentivizing the outcomes. Question. In value-based procurement, if anticipated value is not realized, in other words, there's a brilliant salesperson that's not realized, does the vendor receive a lower reimbursement payment? And if the value exceeds that anticipated, does the vendor receive a higher payment? How do you feel about that, Claire?
To an extent, I would agree with that. I mean, the hope would be that, before something achieves national scale, that there actually is a strong enough mechanism around it and measurement tool around it that we kind of know what we're going to get. And the hope would be that perhaps it's going to exceed. But I would agree that it's a shared pain, shared gain scenario if we look at value-based procurement. And so incentivization to improve solutions, I would agree with, is a good investment of taxpayers' money, a good return on investment, then absolutely.
A very specific question, John. When do you anticipate SAP Ariba being rolled out countrywide?
Great question for me. Thank you very much for that. I think that a lot of people think that Ariba is not going to happen. I've got people telling me, big companies saying to me, is it going to happen? And I tell you, we've got 500 companies that are registered. We've 250 catalogues up on the system. I think that's pretty, impressive from rolling out. So as we roll and as we bring in the SI, we're going to make a decision on that. We're going to receive our tenders for a new SI this week. We'll evaluate that over the next couple of weeks, announce that, and then it really kicks off. But already, even with Sláintecare, the chronic disease centres that are being set up, we are already working with the centres on introducing and training people on Ariba. And the companies, to be fair, have put their bit and put their cash where their mouth is sometimes, and actually invested in developing Ariba, which we're very pleased about. So it is on the roll already. It's just to escalate that roll, and that'll happen over the next number of months.
When did you say sustainability would be put in the criteria?
It's already
2023.
Yeah, it has to be in by 2023. That's the requirement. It is in already.
Number of questions about COVID. It seems that necessity was the mother of invention here, and things moved along. Mark, just in relation to vaccines, tenders, and things that happened different. Remember PPE and all of this kind of thing. Do you think there were any learnings from COVID?
I think there were huge learnings, Ivan. I think the biggest learning is all stakeholders have a role to play. I think what COVID has done is it has really accelerated change. You've seen industry step up, whether that be in vaccines, whether that be in PPE, and really lean in to try and move the needle very, very quickly because of that need. And we have seen very willing engagement from the health sector, from John and his team in Ireland, but globally, you've seen that people willing to knuckle down and work together. I think the big risk is that it slips back. We slip back, and that we go back to our old ways. And I think,
well, of course, health spending has to go back. I mean, we can't. It wasn't an emergency, One thing that bugs me, Dennis, that maybe you could help me out. This is portrayed as a win-sum game, but surely the reality is there's very competitive interests here. That if I put money into oncology, I mightn't be putting it into community care. And all these top line, big choices have to be made. As a health economics expert, as opposed to just saying spend more money, what do you think about those choices and how they should be evaluated?
First of all, thank you for the question. I think first of all, we need to have metrics to give evidence to political decision makers. And it's an ethical question asked by case. But I would like to see if ministers of health would have insights. What's the socio-economic burden of certain diseases, and how much do they invest in these diseased areas? Fits it together, right? And where it's not always about investing more in health, it's investing smarter in health, to use digital transformation, to use the patient journeys, or to do prevention, right? To invest in prevention. I think this is important. And then, yes, there will be the question: should we invest more in oncology? Should we invest more in prevention of cardiovascular diseases? But I think that's also an ethical question in the end. But we need to provide the evidence so that we support political decision makers in taking the right decisions.
Okay, Claire, is there too calendar-based an approach to procurement as opposed to value?
Calendar?
Yeah. Annual tenders?
Yeah, there certainly could be an argument made for that. What I would propose is, so we see with innovation we have mechanisms to pilot in the system. Is there a possibility of having a pilot procurement framework for innovation that earmarks a certain amount of the budget towards that? And that way, it's not overinvestment. We can find out what works. We have evidence from the likes of Denmark, from Germany, from the work of the WIFOR Institute to inform the process of developing that framework.
So you develop a ranking system for new technologies?
Exactly.
And
an
the
evaluation
application
tool.
Sounds like common sense.
An evaluation tool that looks at value,
that
measures
rules it out
value.
And that rules it out straight away. Yeah, that's right. It's a bit like money. Don't mention it. But however, no, there is a mechanism, and it's there already in the directives. The directives cater for innovation to come in, be examined in true innovation, and if that particular service or that particular item is in that bracket of innovation, it can be brought in within the regulations and expanded.
Mark, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just on the point around evidence that Dennis mentioned, because I think that's critical to everything we want to do from a value-based procurement perspective. And it is worth acknowledging industry have a big role to play here, and we need to step up and lean in a little bit more in terms of producing compelling evidence for the products that we're bringing to market. So when we engage with procurement and we engage with the other stakeholders, we need to really start to think much more early in the life cycle of the development of our products about what is the outcome we're trying to achieve. So rather than bring innovation...
There's a track record.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
I want to ask you a specific question. Yeah. The long-term plan for procuring COVID-19 vaccines, is there a timeline for issuing a tender for supply?
Well, as you know, the vaccines can change quite quickly in relation to COVID and the different strains that are there. We have all the medical people working on that and done through the immunisation office, along with the treatment, the various different treatments on progressive drugs and so on, all that kind of way. So we work with Colin Henry and his team on that, and they tell us as to when and the department.
But can you give us any indicative thing? Is there going to be a September vaccine system, or?
Well,
surely we'll need boosters.
For boosters, there will be boosters, but it's the availability of those boosters and where we get on the supply chain of those, and that's down to often negotiations. And if you look back on COVID and you look at, we had mountains of money because we had to have mountains of money. We had very high prices which will drop off the cliff when the next variant comes out. So it is about, I'm not saying hedging in any way, but the medical people call that.
I've been at other conferences, and people in your job have spoken about profiteering from the Ukraine situation,
Fantastic.
whereby people are opportunistically increasing transport costs, building costs, and so on. Now, in fairness, costs have gone up.
Yes.
Price of steel has gone from $450 a tonne to over $2,000 a tonne. So some of this is verifiable. What's your approach to price variation clauses?
Okay, well, price variation, we're often in on fixed. A lot of our contracts go in on fixed, and in real time, that isn't sustainable, to steal a phrase there now, but it is sustainable when you know that the cost of fuel and diesels has gone up, right? And we all know that. We all suffer that personally, and we all suffer that as organisations. So we have to be realistic. But what we had, and I mentioned earlier on, 2 days after the war started, I had the price of bread going through the roof because there was no wheat. And that didn't happen overnight, but it is happening, and we see the evidence of the issues around wheat. Just to mention one point, trying to get wheat out of the country is a major issue for Ukraine at the moment, and that will have a knock-on effect. And yes, but it's about the evaluation.
So you're not going to be taken for a ride, is that what you're saying?
No, we don't want to be, because remember what we're here about. Every single one in the room is here for patient care.
Yeah.
And every time we spend money inappropriately on certain areas, it goes away from another part. You mentioned that yourself.
Okay.
So that's what we're trying to do.
I'm going to wrap this up. You've heard, and John's done plenty of answering, a new corporate plan for procurement. Starting with you, Dennis, in one sentence, what should that procurement plan contain? Dennis.
Change value.
No, I don't need you.
Impact on investments. So measure the impact of different investments along the value chain of healthcare in all three dimensions: economic, ecological, and societal.
All right, Mark.
Yeah, I think for me,
What should the new corporate plan?
yeah, I think it needs to move to scale. Debt by pilot. Let's move to scale.
Scale.
Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean?
Yeah, so for me that means we have had so many pilots now on value-based procurement right across Europe. We proved it works. We know that it can have a big impact on outcome. Now let's start to look at some of the big categories that we have in this country, and let's see how can we
implementing the success stories from the pilot, which have a proven track record of actually better outcomes and better value that way and cost. What would you like to see in the corporate plan?
A very clear definition of what value is, but also an understanding, showing a demonstrated understanding of the various perspectives on value. And how we can measure those, and as Dennis would say, where's that evidence for measurement going to come from?
All right, I'm going to give you the last word. My thanks to Claire Harney, Mark Coffey, John Swords, and from Dennis Ostwald for joining us from the WIFO Institute in Germany. That